Hi, today we're going to talk about making charts. Over the last few days, we've begun to notice how themes and life lessons can be found in many different books. But then we started digging deeper and noticing how the details within each book, especially the setting, create differences in stories that are linked by a common theme or life lesson. We had talked about previously that the theme in Crow Call and Fox were the same, but that the settings made the stories completely different. I know that when I read, I exert lots of brain power, tracking details that I'm going to use to support my big thoughts about theme, and then going back to the evidence, revising my thinking about theme and using my evidence. That's hard work, not easy to do with one book, let alone 2, 3, or more. So today I want to teach you how I deal with keeping track of all the evidence so that I can focus on big thinking, theme-based work when I compare books with similar themes. The teaching point for today, as readers begin to compare texts, we need to develop some systems to help us recall the texts we've read. Sometimes making charts that list the titles, issues or themes, and characters helps us to quickly recall texts so we can move on to analyzing them. When we're talking about texts, we're just talking about books that you're reading. Often, to do this work, we need to return to a book we previously read, revisiting the parts that seem important, gathering evidence so that we can compare the two texts. I would love to see everyone in here doing this work in the way that best suits them. I'm going to show you what I think is an easy way to track details and evidence, but this is not the only way. What matters here is not copying my chart, but organizing the evidence. I'm going to make a grid, but I can also imagine this working with Venn diagrams, lists, or maybe even, I can't imagine, what else? A bubbled, like inspiration type thing, that would work too. Whatever works for you is the important thing. Alright, notice how. Think about what information, I want you to notice these things. Think about what information I want to track about my books. Set up a chart that will help me track details about books. Revisit my book to gather some of the evidence. Continue adding on to the chart, making it my own by using color and columns for things that interest me. I would highly, highly suggest you use color. Here's an example of a chart that Mr. Whitcomb made. Alright, so he made a chart of the last 3 stories that we've read. If you look at here, he's got at the top of his chart the book, the main characters, the theme or issues that they're dealing with, and the setting. So Crow Call, he said that was the father and the daughter. Some of the themes or issues that they were talking about in that book were forming relationships, and we had talked about trust. That was one thing we came up with that was in common. Parents and children building a relationship. So the setting was post-World War II on a Pennsylvania farmland. It was fall in the forest. It was cold. It was clear. It happened over just one day, and they were on a hilltop. In Fox, the main characters are dog, magpie, fox, and theirs is also about building and breaking relationships. So in some way, the same as relationships. It's also about trust. This is also about judgment and then being faithful or loyal. So the setting was a post-forest fire, and it was in the forest and the stream, and then later in the desert. It happened over like a period of time, maybe a year, and then it was in the distance. I'm sorry, not quite sure what he means by distance. Oh, they traveled a distance, sorry. Okay, then the stolen party was about Rosario, Rosara's mom, and Senor Inez and Luciana. It's about class conflict, which they mean like a conflict between the poor and the rich. The loss of innocence, as we know, Rosara, her innocence is gone now. Coming of age, meaning like growing up, and inexperienced judgment. So again, that sense of judgment going on. Whoops, you made it error here. Okay, it's again judgment, like the girl didn't make a good judgment in this case. It probably took place in the 70s or the 80s, and it took place in Argentina. So let's go back to, I'm not sure why it does this every time. We will start it again. Alright, so where we were, here we were. Okay, so that's just one example of Mr. Whitcomb's chart that he made for the 3 stories we read in class. Leaving yourself enough space in your reader's notebook to add in books as you continue to read them. Try this workout with one book. So make a chart, or whatever you want to do, a Venn diagram, an inspiration bubble, whatever works best for you, to keep track of the book that you're reading, and then we're going to add books as we go along. If you have a good book in mind that you want to compare your book to, you could also make a chart for that one. Staying organized is always key to success. I'm expecting that you will take time to keep this chart in working order so that you can continue to think deeply about books, noticing how their themes, characters, settings, etc. overlap and are different. We're in 8th grade, so I'm not going to remind you to update this chart every time you move on to a new book, but take some time today or any day in workshop to do this work. You will need to use it in the near future. And when I say that, I mean it. You're going to use this chart for an assessment coming up in the next, probably quarter. I think it's in the next unit. And if you don't do this work now, then you're really going to have a hard time doing any type of assessment that we're going to ask you to do in the future. So take the time to do it, and like the lesson says, keep it updated. Whenever you finish a book, go add it. As you're reading the book, add it in as you're coming across these things. Off you go to do good work.